Good morning, and welcome to week 5. I'm glad to have you all here for lecture number 5. So, this week we're looking at the second social sciences chapter, right? And we're also discussing the IMRAD genre. So, chapter 4 in the Kagan book talks about different concerns in the social sciences, specifically with regard to economics and political science. You'll talk about something that a lot of my students comment on when they refer to the book. They refer to the 3 equals 2 section, which is also the 2 equals 1 section. And you'll figure out what I'm talking about. It's Rawls' theory. And then you'll also dig into how economics forms the basis of the relationship between the West, how Europe and North America share values based on the accumulation of wealth rather than anything else. So it's a good chapter that will help you sort of understand the more political, economic, one might say socio-political aspects of the social sciences. Now for the IMRAD genre, we talked about a little bit library research and how to find the kinds of things that you need to put into your IMRAD paper. But the IMRAD genre is one that you will basically practice your whole college career. And most of you beyond that as well. Basically, IMRAD is Introduction, Methods, Results, and Discussion. It's an acronym to help you learn to keep those sections in order. Your paper should have all of those sections: an introduction, a methods section, a results section, and a discussion section. So the introduction is not a summary of the whole paper. That's the abstract. If you're writing in a style like APA that requires an abstract, then that's a summary of the whole paper. But the introduction in this case is not. And I've got the IMRAD cheat sheet. It's on Blackboard, right? So the IMRAD report cheat sheet. And this talks to you more about what each section is, and even includes the abstract if you would like to learn about that. So, in the introduction, you're basically introducing yourself to the conversation. I like to think about the conversation that you're entering as like a party, right? So you come into a party and you don't immediately start talking, yeah? Often you will go to a group that's at the party, say a circle of 3 or 4 people that are talking, and you'll sort of sidle up and listen in, right? You'll listen to what they're talking about first, and when you figure out what they're talking about, only then are you going to interject with something, right? You're going to wait for them to start talking about that thing that you know something about. And you listen for a little bit, and then you say, oh yeah, but what about this? And then somebody responds to you, well, what about this? And then you have the conversation, right? So that's how academia works, yeah? You read a little bit of the scholarly work that's already out there, right? And then you respond to some of it. What about this other thing? And if you do it well enough, somebody will respond to you. What about this other thing? right? Sensei Albright says this, but I think really he's after this. Then I keep track of who said that, and I say, well, Mr. Steve over here said this about my work, and I would like to rebut that this, right? So that's how you keep working as an academic. You contribute to this conversation. And after a while at that party, right, you might move on to another circle and talk about something else. Or you might just excuse yourself at the end and say, well, that's all I needed to say, right? So in the same way, right, you leave the conversation after a while. So on the paper level, right, you want to discuss a gap or a problem in your field, right? Something that doesn't exist in the literature that you've read, but that you can contribute to it, right? I saw that scholar A said this, and scholar B said this, but what they didn't identify was this one crack in the middle, and then you take that crack and you widen it, right? You open it up a little further, and you expose why that's an important crack, yeah? And that's what you do in your introduction. Your methods. Usually this is going to be past tense, passive voice, with some subheadings, right? This is where you write, what did you do, right? So this is not, all right, I went to the library and I checked out this book and I found out that this. No, that's not what you're doing here, right? You're describing your experiment, like your experimental procedure in a lab report, right? That's what you're doing, right? You're describing what you're looking for when you're in the literature, not how you found the literature, yeah? So a method section might be, I counted the number of times corn was mentioned in these 3 books, and I can determine that the author must be a corn farmer because blah, right? You wouldn't actually talk about your results in the method section, but you would talk about how you came to the conclusion that if 15 mentions of corn were appearing in the same book, then the author must be a corn farmer, right? Bad example, but, something like that, right? I counted this thing, and this thing logically leads to this thing. So if this thing is true, then this thing must be true. There should be a logical bridge between the two, yeah? So, once you have that, right, you move on to the results. What happened when you did that thing, right? So, when I counted the number of instances of the word corn in these 3 books, I found that none of them mentioned corn. Therefore, I can conclude that none of the authors were corn farmers, right? So, your results should refer to some sort of visual aid, right? A table would be great. You should support the findings in your report, the results, with data, right? If there are additional secondary trends, you should support that as well. And then talk about any exceptions to your main trends. I would say comment less on your results and save that for the discussion. That section is, what does it mean, right? It should contain things like things that allow your reader to get in on that conversation, right? We talked about the conversation circles at the party, right? your paper should be an entrance ramp to that conversation. Yeah? They should be able to follow how you got from the initial statement that you observed to your results. Yeah? If you're saying, well, Scholar A said that authors who mention corn a lot obviously have something to do with farmers. And then Scholar B said, well, farmers often write books and have lots of corn featured in it. Then you would put those two together and say maybe my method is I looked for instances of authors using corn, the word corn, and found that these particular authors who are farmers didn't use the word corn very often. And therefore, Scholar A and Scholar B are mistaken, right? So that's methods and results, right? In your discussion then, yeah, what does that mean? Well, for starters, it means that Scholar A and B are silly, right? But you can talk about what makes this a unique finding, right? So maybe Scholar A and Scholar B are professors, and you think that maybe they're silly and shouldn't be working as professors, right? You can connect these findings to other research, right? So maybe Scholar C always said that these guys were crazy for relating mentions of the word corn to being a farmer, but nobody ever listened to Scholar C. And you could say you're taking up that case, yeah? You could discuss any flaws that happened in your study. Maybe one of your books was a misprint, and you found that that misprint affected how many mentions of the word corn you had in your copy, right? And that would be a possible flaw in your study. And then use those flaws as a reason to suggest additional future research, right? So don't just cut this off as something that is a one-off study that is now discovered and you can move on to the next thing you're going to discover. In the humanities and the social sciences generally, you're not going to ever prove much of anything, right? Because we have a different standard of evidence than proof, right? We show logical bridges between things, generally, but proving things, right, is something that not even natural sciences often do, yeah? Because to prove something is very difficult, right? You would have to show that in every instance this is the case, yeah? Newton's theories of gravity don't hold true in space, right? So Einstein said, hey, look, Newton was wrong, right? And then Hawking came along and said, hey, look, Einstein was wrong. Now there's even a little boy who's coming along and saying, hey, look, Hawking was wrong, right? And so even the people we think of as our greatest minds in science are often proven wrong eventually, yeah? Or proven to not have the full answer, yeah? So as we navigate what's true and what's not, we need to be careful not to say, I have proven this. Because often you won't ever prove anything in your entire career, right? You'll show that there's a logical connection. You will prove a correlation, perhaps. You will show that right now this one thing is the case. But very few things in the universe are either black or white. Even my shirt and my wall are not absolutely black and white, right? My wall might be a tint of blue that they lightened in order to make white. My shirt is definitely a shade of green that is darkened to be black, right? But very few things in the universe are black and white, and very few things in the universe are either or anything. Very few people are always or never anything. Let me say that again. Very few people are always or never anything. A criminal is not always bad. Good is not always right. So, when we say in our papers, we've proven something, I want you to be fully aware of what you're saying. Yeah? Not that it's not a very reliable statement. Yeah, it makes me feel like you don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. So rather than saying I have proven something, say something like, when I did my methods, I got these results. These results mean that this is possible, right? Something along those lines. So that you're not violating your standard of evidence for your academic discipline. So, there are examples in this IMRAD cheat sheet that talk about the kinds of things that you need to be doing, since my examples were horrible. There's also this document, which is the assignment and rationale, right? I do imagine this to be around 15 pages. That does not mean 7 is adequate. But I do want you to worry less about the actual length of it and focus more on making sure that you're providing your readers with all the information that is required and usually present in that IMRAD report. In so doing, you'll often find that your work will develop to the appropriate length. I talk about the rhetorical situation, 4 factors in here: genre, purpose, audience, style, voice, right? What kind of information can you find in a report? Why are you writing? Why should it be published in this journal? Who are you writing for? Who is the editor? Who are the readers? What sort of style or voice is common in that publication? Right? So you should be looking to publish in a specific publication, right? Your criteria, right? So make sure you follow all this criteria. And when you hand in the IMRAD report, which I'm sure you'll be working on not only this week but next week as well, when you hand that in, just be sure that you have followed those criteria as closely as possible, and that you've looked at the IMRAD genre conventions and really taken them to heart. If we look again at Blackboard, I do also have I will have to upload an example IMRAD that I have, because it doesn't look like I've uploaded that. But I will upload that for you, so that you have an idea. You can see it's right here. so that you can see what that looks like in a journal. And that should help. Although for some of you it might just be scary, right? So this is the abstract, right? Start off in the introduction. Little is known about the expectations and experiences that combat veterans bring with them to campus. Then continue on in the introduction. Theoretical framework, that's their methods section, right? Then they continue on into a research method, right? Talk about their sampling size. Findings, that's the results section. Note they've got a table in there.
So they do have a table.
Results are long for this study.
Okay.
Implications for practice, there's a discussion section. And conclusion, which is very short. And they've got some end material. So that's basically what that should look like, right? You will have different sorts of styles depending on what style you're writing in, but the basic structure of an MRAD paper will not change very much. You might say, Sensei Albright, this looks like a social science or a natural science thing. Well, often people will use this paper regardless of what academic discipline they're writing in. You may not use the subheadings if you're using it for an art class, or you may use a different format, but this makes logical sense. Even if you don't have the headings and the subheadings, you can change the formality of it, but it often will make good sense even if it's not specifically required, just because it's a very sound method for writing a paper. So that's why we're practicing. So daily work this week. I would like you to respond to the video. I would like you to respond to the chapter. And I would also like you to come up with a topic that you would like to write about. I know that I asked you to do that, I believe, last week, but I want to show you the CFP website. Right here. I don't know if I showed you this last week, but anyway, here it is. So if you're having trouble finding a research topic, generally a good place to come is to this UPenn Call for Papers website. And if you look at, say, English education, right, this will show you each organization that has a call for papers up for English education, right? So mindfulness, reconceptualizing peer assessment, universal design, empowering the new professorate, teaching writing at specialized institutions, brutal themes and brutal times, teaching Edgar Allan Poe in a culture of violence, critical reading, writing, and thinking across curriculum, defining critical in the 21st century. This is at Berkeley College in Midtown Manhattan, so I'm going to click on that one because I like going to Manhattan. Right? And that will tell me what I need to do. I need to write a paper that examines what does critical thinking mean, what does it replace or is it replaced by, How do we use the term, and how does it encode and is already encoded in our minds, practices, and pedagogies? How should higher education uphold and stimulate the democratic ideology of critical thinking, engage in intellectual freedom, and also yet function as gatekeeper against misinformation and irrationality? Right. So all they're asking for here is 250 to 500 words on a paper I may not have yet written, due by July 22nd, so you can still apply to this conference, right? And they're asking for you to grasp or tackle one of these sorts of questions that they're asking for this conference. Yeah? So it's a good one for you to get your feet wet, right? Because it will allow you to wrestle with one of those topics. It's only a sixth year conference, so they probably won't be too picky about who they let in, right? So even if your abstract that you send to them is less than perfect, they might still be willing to work with you, and that would be an opportunity for you to speak at a conference about your research. Yeah. So as you're writing your MRAD, again, think about all those things. Think about it as you read the chapter in the book. You might find that there's a topic that comes up in the chapter that you would like to use. And think about your daily work, right? Your response to the lecture, the book chapter, and then your search for a topic. And I would like you to firm by Friday at least, because it'll be due the next week, right? And you need at least a week to write this well, right? Often, this is the first time my students are writing a 15-page paper, so it does get easier. Don't let it scare you. It is double-spaced, right? So it's only really like 7.5 pages. So you can do it. I have faith. So I will see you next week. Happy writing, happy research, and see you all later.